Now we're coming to another really gorgeous woman, Lenore Ulrich. Maybe some of you heard of her. She was a great star of the Broadway stage. Not the movies, the stage. And that's why she's much forgotten now. Because, you know, when you're not in pictures, you disappear. But she was in her prime from about 1916 to about 1930. She came from Minnesota. She was destined for the theater. Her father named her Lenore after the poem, The Raven. Remember? Lenore is the name of the girl he loved. She was discovered by David Belasco. He was one of those tremendous impresarios, producers, showbiz people of that era. And he discovered people and became sort of a second father to them and promoted them and put them in plays and advertised them and all the rest. And he did with her. And she did very, very well, appeared in play after play as a fiery, hot-blooded femme fatale. That was her kind of role. It was called an Ulrich role. None of those plays are still done today. They were all of that time. The theater changed drastically with the onset of the Depression. And there were no more roles for her. While she was in her heyday, she bought an old farmhouse that had been part of the Van Cortlandt estate on Sunset Drive opposite the Andersons. It was a large parcel, 7 acres between Sunset and Cleveland. It's still there. I took a good look at it the other day. And she lived there for many years. But no more roles, no more money, and this is what happens to actors when the times change. Now, here's something that I thought was an interesting little tidbit. We hear a great deal today of men who behave badly. And when there's people break up or whatever, it's always their fault. But this is kind of refreshing. She was married for a few years to a fellow actor and then divorced him. And this is what she said. I don't think I'm comfortable to live with. I have a temper. I'm difficult. I'm too quick and too impulsive. And men have a right to be comfortable. I thought that was kind of nice. Unfortunately, she outlived her time and died in poverty, as so many actors do. Our next, let's see, we have some gorgeous pictures of her. Oh, this is one of those plays she was in, where she was Oriental, supposedly. Next. Oh, look at that. Oh, wasn't she something? She looked a lot like Greta Garbo, didn't she? Really beautiful and talented. There are people in the audience, I'm sure, who recognize this woman, Francie Alvin. She was a very, very well-known Croton institution, primarily a teacher. Teaching was her passion. A naturalist, historian, knew everything about the geography, geology, and fauna of the lower Hudson Valley. She led nature walks with little kids, nursery school kids, to take them out into nature, acquaint them with nature, and school-age children and adults. Here she is looking at a rock, and that's quite typical. She knew rocks. She had grown up in Saugerties in upstate New York with very free-thinking parents who took her on walks. She collected rocks and fossils and was familiar with nature. She was a passionate gardener, knew everything about plants. And now, I think the next picture will show us, oh no, it's coming. But that's a nice picture of her arranging a vase, a bouquet. She lived, there she is in her house, at the top of Mount Airy, the house, the Boardman Robinson house where Edna St. Vincent Millay met and married her husband. I think the Albert bought it from the Robinsons. Next. Now you see, when she went on these walks, people had trouble following her a lot of the time. She was intrepid. She went to Bryn Mawr and to Smith. She studied literature and Latin. And then she went to Parsons Art Institute because she was interested in art. And that came in very, very handy because she married Dr. Adolf Elwin, who was, and I can never remember what his specialty was. He was a neuroanatomist, whatever that is. But he became a very distinguished professor at Columbia, and he wrote medical books, and she illustrated them. And that's what she did in the early years. She was a medical illustrator. Then they had children, and they were among the first 10 parents who moved to Croton so that their children could go to the Hessian Hills School. And she also taught, became a teacher at the Hessian Hills School as well. Teaching really was her passion. She went up to, does that still exist, Wingdale? There was a state mental hospital.
It's closed, the building still exists.
Is it in Columbia County? Yeah, it was a huge mental hospital. And, you know, the mental hospitals of that era, they were just prisons. That's really what they were. They warehoused people. And Francie would go up there and take these patients out into the open and would garden with them. And they would collect rocks and fossils and identify plants and trees. And it did them a world of good. And you can see that this is so necessary. She said, I wish I were triplets. So she was unhappy that more people did not volunteer to go and concern themselves with the patients. Of course, it's all a thing of the past because then medicines came in to give mental patients so that, you know, they could leave the hospital, and that was the end of those hospitals. We can talk about that another time. She was naturalist emeritus of Teatown Reservation and a director of the Westchester Mental Health Association. You can imagine, she was full of energy. She was active in the League of Women Voters and in the peace movement also. Now, the Albans had, as you can imagine, 3 very children who were very good students. And the son became a professor of medicine at Harvard. And the girls, twin girls, Sally and Betty, were outstanding also. They enrolled the twins in 2 different schools so that both of them could be valedictorians. There are anecdotes about Francie. She once bet a friend who drove her to Cape Cod from Croton that she could recite poetry from memory all the way and never repeat a line. She won the bet. And here's a really cute story that Charlie told me the other day. Some kids were trying to trip her up, and they took some rocks from somebody's yard and brought them to Francie and asked her to identify them. And she said, "Those rocks are from Jean Hill's backyard, and you better go and put them back where you found them." Well, that was Francie. Is there another picture of her? Oh yeah, now here she's on one of these nature walks with kids and adults. Next. I have no pictures of her when she was younger. I don't think she was very vain. There aren't very many pictures of her. Next. Do you recognize who this is? Vera Neumann, the famous Vera. She lived up on Finney Farm. She was a graduate of Pratt, a wonderful artist, and she wanted to design things for people and their homes. This was during World War II, and there were not any materials. She looked around, and the only thing she found was silk. Parachutes were made from silk, and you could buy silk. And that was the beginning of scarves by Vera. Silk scarves were her first items that she designed. She married a refugee from Germany, Georg Neumann, and together they went into business as the Vera Company. Vera Company, yes. Their atelier was Printex in Arsenal, where all the designing took place. She was incredibly full of ideas, is what I'm trying to say. And she was famous as a colorist. She was the first person to put pink and green and yellow all together. That was really pretty much unheard of. I think that America, many years of depression and then many years of World War II, where everything was sort of gray or black and white, and even the art was kind of, you know what I mean, color was not the thing of the social realists. And she burst forth, and people were ready to embrace that. They wanted color in their homes and on themselves, and this is why it was such a huge success. In other words, she hit the zeitgeist, as it were, and the designs were absolutely lovely. And this is what she did. I made a list. Blouses, pants, skirts, dresses, aprons, lingerie, luggage, table and bed linen, bathroom accessories, draperies, dishes, needlepoint, prints, posters, trays, tiles, ashtrays, handkerchiefs, napkin rings, coasters, cheese board, banners, wallpaper, and that doesn't say it all. I had a dress once. I loved it. There were 20,000 stores worldwide selling her things. The business was a multi-million-dollar business. Tremendous. Um, they commissioned a world-famous architect, Marcel Breuer, to design their house on Finney Farm. A beautiful, elegant, small house. I think next to the Van Cortlandt Manor and the Bethel Chapel, the most distinguished house in this community. It has also a guest house in the rear. The current owners are restoring it to its original glory. They lived there, and they had a stable, if that's how it's pronounced, by Calder on their front yards. And it was stunning. Let's see. Mark, next please. Yeah, here she's at work at Printex. This is her signature, the buck, Vera. And some of these designs, the next one also, were picked up by the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and they made a box of greeting cards out of them. It's so upbeat, so effervescent. Next. Isn't that lovely? And this was their house. It's there. Or can't see it too well, but you can get an idea. It's in the Bauhaus style. And I have a picture of their living room, and you can see the view that they enjoyed out of their living room window. This is the famous view down past Croton Point, almost to the city. And they collected art, and this looks to me suspiciously like a Georgia O'Keeffe painting. Now we come to Jane Northshield. And this is where I'm getting pretty emotional, because she was my friend. We met during the preparations for the bicentennial. The peculiar thing was the Northshields and the Cottons had moved to Croton at the same time in 1953, but we had never met in 20 years. I heard people say, "You must meet Jane Northshield. She's one of the nicest people you'll ever meet." They were right. It took 20 years, but then we finally met. This is her as a child, and I adore that picture. It's Jane. She grew up in Nebraska. She had arranged an exhibit of books by Croton authors. And this was just the kind of thing that interested me too. And there were all the books, and then there were tiny little pieces of paper kind of stuck in them with her handwriting on it, and saying who the author was and a little bit about them. And I said to her, "Jane, the next time you make an exhibit, let me help you with the labels." Labels being my great passion. And she took me up on it, and from then on we worked together. We worked on a big exhibit about Isadora Duncan, also for bicentennial, and we became fast friends. She gave me credit for teaching her how to put a work of art on the wall so nobody can take it away. She was astounded, and she said that again and again, but I got the better bargain from her. This was a woman. Her greatness really was, and she had unfailing common sense. I don't know about you, but I think there's very little of it to go around. She had the most wonderful attitude in the world toward everything. If something didn't work out in life and people complained, she would say, "It's all for the best." And the funny thing is, it always was. It it never failed. If people complained that they didn't get enough sleep, she would say, just say, I got enough sleep. She was right, it worked. When people complained about unloving or cruel parents, she would say, they did the best they could. Now, I remembered all of these things of Jane's that when I overheard her talk with people, and one time a woman told me about her awful parents and how miserable they were and all the things they did or didn't do. So I decided to quote Jane. And I said, well, you know, they did the best they could. And the woman said, no, they didn't. So it didn't always work. She also, you know, many people worry about what others think of them. Or this one doesn't like me, or this one has something against me. Is it getting late? Oh. And they worry about that. And Jane said, I assume everybody likes me. And she went out into the world and people did. She sometimes had critics, but what she did was she would go right up to them and invite them to join her in a common project and work with her. And that way, they became part of the team, and the criticisms disappeared pretty quickly, because then they took responsibility too. She was the most wonderful person. And all of this good sense from a woman who had a tragic, tragic childhood. We won't go into it, but she fled from a violent and abusive home to St. Louis to become a nurse. She studied nursing, and when she was finished with those classes, she took extra classes because she wanted to become a pediatric nurse, and she wanted to work with very sick and dying children. That was her goal, and that's what she did. She became a pediatric nurse in various Midwestern cities. And incidentally, this just came up now with all the things we hear about abusive men. She told me once that the nurses used to hide in the linen closet because of the predatory doctors. Apparently, it was a real problem. Anyway, in Chicago, she met her husband. Next, Robert Shad Northshield. This is their wedding picture. And he was a cub reporter for the Chicago Tribune, and then got into television at the ground level and rose to the ultimate heights until he became first a vice president at NBC and then a vice president and producer at CBS. One of the beautiful shows which he created is still on after all these years. He's been dead many years. It's called Sunday Morning on CBS. He created that show. That was his idea with Charles Kuralt originally. I haven't seen it lately. If anyone watches it, I think it has a drafting board in it. And that was something Jane had in her room. And he used that as a prop in that show. So they came to New York. For him, he worked, of course, in the city, and they moved to Croton and lived on Mount Airy. She raised 4 boys, one biological son, 2 adopted ones, and 1 foster son, a little boy whom Shad met when he did a story in Laos at one time for television. The little boy had been separated from his family in Vietnam. He was a Vietnamese boy. And he took him home, and Jane raised him. Her boys adored her. She was the most wonderful mother. And Nguyen was his name. When the war was over, he went back to Vietnam and he found his family. So it was a great success story. He, I think, lives in Chicago. He's in public health. But Jane, after a while, couldn't be a nurse anymore because her hearing got worse and worse, and she couldn't hear the children that she was tending in the hospitals. So then, in middle age, she went back to school. She got a liberal arts degree at the College of New Rochelle, and then she studied at Prague. She studied local history and local government. And that's when she was asked to become village historian. She was a historian for more than 20 years. She did a wonderful job. Her greatest work was our wonderful blue book, The History of Croton Hudson. And it's like Jane, she got a whole group of diverse people together, all kinds of people. One wrote about Bethel Chapel, one wrote about the railroad, one wrote about the Cortland Manor, and so forth. So about 20 people at the dam. She wrote the chapter about Mount Airy, and then she got all of these people together, and they all wrote a chapter, and then she put it all together and edited it and saw it through to publication. You can buy that wonderful book at the Historical Society. They open on Tuesdays from 9 to 3 at the Municipal Building. And, she did this in time for the bicentennial. You're probably all much too young to remember the bicentennial, but it was a huge thing, huge. I mean, the events, the lectures, the exhibits, all the things we did here at Croton and all our communities, it really energized people to become interested in history and in local history. And at the end of all these events here in Croton, we were exhausted and we were gasping for breath, and Jane said, "How about the tricentennial?" And people said, "Well, that's not until 100 years from now." No. The town of Portland is 300 years old now, and we've got to do something about that. So she did. She did the same thing. She gathered people from all over the town of Portland, and they all became writers, and she gathered it all into the history of the town of Portland. Now, when I first went in business, I had a very large gallery out on Route 129 in a big building. I had a whole floor. Not all the rooms, just most of them. And Jane came and visited me. And I had a bunch of second-hand art books there, and I wanted her opinion. I said, "You think I should add, second-hand art books to my gallery?" She said, "No. This is what I wanted to do all my life. I wanted to have a second-hand bookstore." And I said, "Well, there's a room there, an empty room." She went right to the owner. She rented it that day, and she went into business as the Old Book Room. And we were together there for several years, and then we both opened our shops at 111 Grand Street, Old Book Room, and Cornelia Cotton Gallery. We were together for 25 years and shared everything. And were best friends, and during lulls in our business, and that was pretty often, we would sit and talk about life and love and art and people and all the interesting things in this world. Jane became increasingly deaf, and toward the end of her life, she really couldn't hear anymore. But that didn't really matter. If you had her as a friend, you were in good hands. She gave you your full attention. She listened to you. She was your friend. And in those last years, there were several people who would sometimes come in and sit with her and talk with her and pour out the stories of their lives. And she would give them her full attention, didn't hear a word they were saying. Looked at them, smiled, nodded, and then they would go away happy. They had a free therapy hour, and they felt great. And that was her gift. Oh, she was so pretty. These are her 4 boys. That's no longer there at the right end. She was a gourmet cook, and I mean it. And her husband, of course, was a big shot, and he ate at the Four Seasons. He had lunch. Then when he came home, he wanted gourmet dinners to cook them. Wonderful cook. Here she is doing rubbings on graves. I honestly don't know where that is. I hope somebody can help me. I think there's one more picture of her. That's in the old cookroom. Space shared at 111 Grand. Now, you probably know her, that is Lorraine Hansberry, who was a great American writer. A young woman, brilliant young woman, grew up in Chicago and in a well-to-do middle-class black family. And her father wanted to move the family into a white neighborhood, which he did, but those houses in that white neighborhood had restrictive covenants on them, which did not allow black families to buy these houses. So Mr. Landman, her father, got a friend, a white friend, to buy it for him. They moved in, and immediately they were harassed, and there were very unpleasant incidents. Her father was undeterred. He brought suit against the whole thing. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled that restrictive covenants are unconstitutional. And we owe that to the Hansberry family. And I think that's wonderful in itself. And when she was in college, she saw plays. She saw a play by O'Casey, and she decided to become a writer. She went to New York. She moved around in bohemian and artistic circles and started to write articles for a newspaper, a magazine published by Paul Robeson called Freedom. And under his influence, she became quite radicalized, and as a she went to Communist Party, as a matter of fact. But within a few years, she wrote feverishly, and the play, of course, is The Raisin in the Sun, which changed the American theater. She was 28 years old when that play was produced on the Broadway stage. It was the biggest hit in decades, and it, of course, put her on the map, but far more important, it for the first time familiarized a lot of white Americans with what it's like to be black, to be part of a black family. So it was a wonderful play, and a movie was made of it that was also wonderful. Sidney Poitier got his start. He kind of like jumped right into our world. That was his, let's see the next picture, Mark. Isn't that a nice picture of Gloria Lansbury? And the next, this was the original program. And there are scenes from the play, not the movie, the play. It won every conceivable prize, and it ran for years, practically, and it made her very famous. She was married to a man who had ties to Croton, Robert Nemiroff, and they lived on the other side of the Croton River in the Teatown area. Let's see the next picture. That's Claudian McNeil. He was so good and so good looking. Next. I think there's been a revival of this play, wasn't there, recently? It's still great. Next. And there she is. Now, at one time, I met her twice. At one time, she organized a big meeting on race relations at Temple Israel. And she had some young people from the South who had been beaten and mistreated. And she was a mesmerizing speaker. I'll never forget it. But another time, I met her again. And I've written a paragraph about that. Raisin in the Sun had made a deep impression on me. I had a very brief meeting with her while I was on a tour of duty as a telephone book delivery person on a hopeless quest of trying to earn 7 cents per book delivered in a race against gas spent driving from one isolated house to another in the backwoods of the town of Croton.
As I approached Miss Hansberry's house, 2 large dogs started a frenzied barking and jumping behind the glass panes of the entrance. Terrified, I stood at a distance, clasping her white and yellow pages. Miss Hansberry appeared in a robe, looking very frail. I did not know then that she was desperately ill, and restraining the dogs, opened the door a crack. As I stepped forward to hand her the books, I shouted over the noise of the dogs, "I loved your play!" Her worried expression gave way to a smile so beautiful that it repaid me handsomely for the ordeal of the dogs and the money lost in the delivery job, leaving me with a cherished remembrance of a lovely woman and writer. She died shortly thereafter. She was 34 years old and was buried in our own Bethel Cemetery.